In this video, we'll explore measures of central tendency. Now, a measure of central tendency is a value that represents a typical or central entry of a data set. The three that we primarily talk about are the mean, the median, and the mode. The mean is the sum of the entries divided by the number of entries. The median, we're going to line them up in order and then find the value that's directly in the middle. If we have an even number of entries, we find the average of the two middle entries. And then the mode is the data entry that shows up with the greatest frequency. And it is possible to have multiple modes. Last thing is we have to also pay attention to outliers in our data. An outlier is a piece of data that's well removed from all the other entries, and that can influence our measures of central tendency. So the first one is the mean, and often we talk about both the population mean and the sample mean. And it's important to start to see some of these symbols and understand what they mean when you're looking at them. We have this letter that looks like a very cursive M. It's called mu. It's a Greek letter, and that represents the population mean, whereas anytime you see the X with a bar over top, that's talking about the sample mean. So that'll help cue you into whether you're talking about population or samples. A lowercase n is talking about the number of values in our sample, whereas a capital N is the number of values in a population. And then just a standard X is the variables, which is often our data entries. And then if you see this capital interesting looking E, which is a sigma, that is the summation symbol. It tells you to add all the values. So again, population mean, we add all our values and then we divide by the total number of values. And we do that both for the mean and the sample mean. An example, say that we took a sample of companies that are selling 2-liter Coke bottles and we want to know what's the mean price for the 2-liter bottle. So we have all our values here. All we're going to do is add them up and divide by the number of entries. So in this case, there were 8 in this, so we add up all the individual values and we divide by 8. What we would find is that the value would come out to 1.32125, and since we're dealing with money, we'd round that to the hundredth. So we would say that the average Coke bottle in a Raleigh grocery store is about $1.32. With the median and mode, let's get an example of those. Say we have our data set here. The first thing we want to do when we're talking about median mode is order our data. It's going to make it a lot easier to find all the pieces we need. So our data is ordered. First, let's look at the median. Well, in this case, there are 10 colleges. That means we need to find the middle two entries and then divide them by 2. In this case, it's going to be these two values here, 35 and 37. So 35 plus 37 divided by 2 would tell us that the median would be $36,000. Whereas the mode, the value that shows up the most, is the 35s. There's 2 of those. So what we can say is that our median cost tuition is $36,000, our mode is $35,000. Now we can use Excel to help us with the mean and the median. What we would do is we use these two formulas. For mean, we use equals average, and then we highlight all the data entries. And then for median, we do equals median and highlight all the data entries, and it'll shoot out the values for us. So if we go back to that 10 college problem, if I just enter my data directly into Excel in each of the rows, I could use the formula, and there's 10, so it'd be rows 1 through 10. And I'd find that the mean cost is 36.9 and the median would be 36, which we found earlier. So we'd say the mean cost of tuition is $36,900, the median is $36,000. Now we also have to pay attention to which is the better measure of center, and that's going to depend on our data. The sample mean is what we're going to use the most because it varies the least amount from one sample to another. However, you got to pay attention to your outliers. When you have extreme outliers that start to skew your data, and you can look at that through the distributions, when you start to see your data become skewed, you're better off to move to looking at the median. The mode we're not going to use often as a measure of center unless we're talking about qualitative data with our categories. So we're going to really be paying attention to the mean and the median. So down here at this problem, we got all these values below the age of students in a local college class, and which measure would you think would describe it this group best in Y. So you've got 19, and then it's kind of consistent 19 through 25, and then you got this extreme value of 54. So you'd want to think about, what do you think that would be? So I mentioned earlier the idea of looking at a distribution, and we have three major shapes that we look at. We look at the uniform, the symmetric, and the skewed. Uniform is just going to be even keeled, so that whatever my first value is compared to my last value, they're going to have about the same frequency. It's not going to change at all. The symmetric is going to be where the left image, like if you drew a line down the middle, the left would mirror the right. It has that bell shape to it. Then our skewed, you end up with a tail, and which way the tail extends will tell you whether it's left skewed or right skewed. If the tail goes to the left, it's left skewed or negatively skewed. If it goes to the right, it's positively skewed. And again, if we're talking about the mean, we're going to be looking at symmetric distributions or uniform distributions. And if we're talking about median, we're often looking at skewed distributions. And here's what those images would look like. As you can see, you've got the bell shape for symmetric, values relatively consistent across the whole thing for uniform, and then you've got your tail to the left and your tail to the right for the skeweds.